I want to wish you all a very warm welcome. This is the second Nursing Reports Reviewers Club webinar that we are hosting today. We are happy to host this at MDPI. So for those of you who aren't familiar with MDPI, we are a pioneer in open access publishing. We have been on the market since 1996. We have a very diverse palette of journals, more than 450 journals that are also peer-reviewed and indexed in various databases. All of them are open access. We also are proud to have 9 conference journals, and we are supported by a lot of academic experts, be they academic editors or reviewers. We are proud to say that we are currently aiming for more than 300,000 experts who collaborate with us. And it's also important to mention that for MDPI, every research is freely available and distributed under the Creative Commons attributions license. About the journal Nursing Reports, we are, since we are part of MDPI, we are also peer-reviewed and open access, and it focuses on nursing sciences from all around the world, and it's published monthly by us. The schedule for today is going to be started by our editor-in-chief, Professor Richard Gray, who is going to talk about ethical issues in peer review at first. Then he's going to be followed by Professor Paula Beneven, who's going to talk about guidelines and effective and ethical reviewing. Then we will be joined by our section editor-in-chief, Dr. Niall Higgins, who's going to speak about the reviewers' ethics, AI, and constructive critique in nursing peer review. And last but not least, Dr. Sajib Zaman, who's going to be talking about transparency and rigor in the peer review process. After all these presentations are going to be finished, we're going to have a Q&A session where all of the scholars who presented their ideas will be available to answer your questions. And at the end, we'll have a closing of the webinar around 5 to 10 minutes, and it's going to be done by Professor Richard Gray. You're going to be noticing that you have a Q&A box near the chat in your Zoom screen. So for any cues, please use that box. The chat is mostly for communication, and it sometimes messages can get lost because you have to select the person who needs to see the message. But for the Q&A, all of the questions will be available to our speakers, so we encourage you to use that. And should you wish to address your questions verbally at the end, just raise your hand and we will give the word to you. So thank you very much for understanding, and I hope you do have a wonderful webinar. Again, this is a picture of our chair, Professor Richard Gray from La Trobe University. I'm going to be handing in the baton now for him to present his slides.
Thanks, Corinne. A bit scary that the photographs sort of vaguely look like me. Apparently that's me smiling. I am constantly in trouble with my children for looking miserable. I am actually not quite as miserable as I look in that picture. Thank you. I'm going to ramble for about 20 minutes and then I'm going to hand over to my colleagues who will similarly talk coherently and intelligently for about 20 minutes, and then questions and answers, or questions and responses, perhaps not necessarily answers. I'm going to focus on questionable research practices. what they are and how to spot them. I think this is an important issue. And I do think it is something that when you are reviewing papers, reviewers need to be increasingly mindful of. And now I'm going to work out how I advance my slides. Okay, um, uh, the joy of being a bit later in your career is that you get to rant about things rather than being measured and considered. So my kind of opening gambit is I wonder whether we've become overly obsessed with measuring academic success by how often papers are cited. We're all a little bit obsessed with this. And in many universities, the way in which you get promoted is by publishing a paper, and that paper is cited a lot more. The more times your paper is cited, the higher your H index. Will avoid going down the debate about whether your H index is or is not a valid measure. But the more citations there are, presumably the better researcher you are, and therefore the more likely you are to get promoted. I think this is dangerous because it sets up and encourages researchers to misbehave. So this is the way in which we measure our academic performance is, I think, directly linked to how we can behave as researchers and how we can drift into doing things that are a bit questionable. Just to remind us that the scientific method, it's always good to have the scientific method. I guess in my mind, this is always something that I am thinking about when I am reviewing research. So the scientific method, you make an observation, observation drives experimentation. You ask a question, which is better, treatment A or treatment B? I do an experiment. I find out if treatment A is better than treatment B, and then I report that. And then hopefully somebody will replicate my research and confirm that what I initially observed is or isn't true. Scientific method. I was very classically trained, so it's kind of embedded and ingrained in my mind. So we do an experiment, and then we want that experiment to be replicated. So this is a debating point because it doesn't always happen. A single study should not change practice. In my opinion, colleagues may wish to debate this. And a single study shouldn't change practice because sometimes single studies throw up curious and unexpected results, type 1, type 2 errors. So replicability is critically important. I don't know how many colleagues online have a good understanding or are aware of the replication crisis in psychology, but the replication crisis, it poses some interesting questions. So replication crisis in psychology goes back to the early 2000s, which in my mind is fairly recent, but actually is quite a long time ago. What Brian Nosek and his colleagues did was to try and replicate 100 psychology experiments that were published in leading journals in 2008. And what they found was that what they found was of those 100 experiments, of which 97 were reported as being significant, in the replication of that, only 36 of 100 were significant, which poses the question, why? Why couldn't those results be replicated? And it makes you wonder about whether researchers were doing some interesting things. And I guess when you're working as a researcher and you do a study, and it's a study where you're trying to show a statistical significance, you want to show that you got the answer that you expected. And I will kind of try and unpack this a little bit more as we progress, but it does go back to the citation delusion. Okay, most people will be aware of unacceptable research practices, things that you just shouldn't do. For example, you should not make up data. Everybody knows that that is bad and you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't manipulate images. It's not acceptable. Don't do it. People do it. And then we know what good research looks like, or we should know what good research looks like. We run a study, we have a methodology, we follow that methodology. That methodology is ethical, and we get the results that we get. So there is good behavior and there is bad behavior. But there is something in the middle, and that is kind of questionable behavior. And I think this is something that reviewers need to be really mindful of when they are reviewing papers. Not is this misconduct, but actually, why have you done this? And again, this goes back to the replication crisis, because when all of those studies were replicated, you didn't get consistency. So why was that? Questionable research practices. What are they? And it might be interesting if colleagues just want to kind of have a little think for a moment about things that researchers might do. And I'll just try and flag a few and talk through a few that I'm particularly interested in. The first of which is harking. I don't know if anybody has come across harking. Harking is hypothesizing after the results are known, or it's post hoc hypothesis testing. If you've done an experiment, if you've done a randomized control trial, you randomize two groups. You randomize a group to treatment A or treatment B. Typically, when you're doing that kind of study, you will measure a number of different things. So my background is in mental health. So if I'm doing a clinical trial, I might measure a range of different outcomes. I might measure mood, I might measure anxiety, I might measure quality of life. But when I get to the end of the study, against the primary outcome, I have no significant difference. I was doing a study to see whether, and this is a true example, I was doing a study to see whether an adherence intervention was effective at improving adherence to treatment. Get to the end of the study, there's no difference in adherence rates between the experimental intervention and the control intervention. But what I do notice is that one of the other outcomes that we were interested in, people's mental symptoms, there was a significant difference. But that wasn't the main outcome we were interested in. That was the third or fourth outcome that we looked at. So what do I report? Do I report that this was a trial with no significant difference? Or do I report that in fact the intervention, whilst it wasn't effective at improving adherence, it was effective at improving people's symptoms? So what do I report? What hypothesis were we actually testing? And I don't know if other colleagues have sat in a room and had these conversations. But what you start to do as a research group, or what you can start to do as a research group, is start to convince yourself that actually your experiment wasn't about improving outcome A, in this example, adherence to treatment. Really what we're looking to do is improve outcome C, which is symptoms. So when I come to write up the paper, what I do is I convince myself that really what we're interested in is outcome C, not outcome A. And I, in fact, claim that rather than this being a unsuccessful trial, it was, in fact, a successful trial. I've hypothesized after I know the results. So I'd ask you just to think for a moment, is that a good thing to do? Is that an okay thing to do? Or is it a questionable thing to do? Another example is p hacking. Don't know if anybody's come across this. So p hacking is where you consciously manipulate the data until they become significant. So you're constantly looking at the data. So you're constantly running an analysis, constantly checking. You may be adding in or removing covariates or confounders. And the moment that you get a significant result, you stop the study. Again, is that okay? Does that make sense? I've got a significant result. I'll report it. And the problem is that the data may have become significant because you had a participant that had an erroneous improvement one way or the other. But you've been constantly checking. And again, it poses the question, is that okay? And the other thing you can do is to add in and remove covariates to see whether that impacts the result. Again, is that an okay thing to do? This is another interesting behavior, and I see this a lot sitting in at my editor-in-chief desk, where people take a single study and they report it across multiple papers. And this applies to both quantitative, so observational research, survey research, experimental research, and to qualitative research. So, for example, you do a qualitative study, you're interviewing people about something, the lived experience of being a cancer patient. You analyze those interviews and you get 5 themes that emerge. You've got a lot of data, you've interviewed a lot of people. Do you report that all in one manuscript, or do you report it across multiple manuscripts? I've seen a number of examples. There are a number of researchers who do this fairly often, which is that they take a single qualitative study and they report each theme as a separate paper. Is that okay? You see it very commonly with people who undertake clinical trials. They take a single randomized controlled trial. They may have 4 or 5 outcome measures. They may consider that each of those outcome measures is important, and they report those across 5 different manuscripts. Is that okay? Does that matter? One of the reasons that it matters both in qualitative and quantitative research is because of the impact it has on systematic reviews. And you do see this quite often. If you look at a systematic, I've looked at a number of systematic reviews, and this is something that you should check as a reviewer. So you look at a systematic review and you look at the included studies, and you notice that there are multiple included studies from the same group of authors. And it does kind of pose the question, have the same group of authors done 4 or 5 different studies, or have they reported different bits of those studies in different manuscripts? Why does that make a difference? Makes a difference because when people write up a systematic review, they will claim that there have been, for example, 10 studies involving 1,000 participants. And if half of those studies actually come from the same study, there haven't been 5 studies, there have been 6 studies. And perhaps rather than involving 1,000 participants, they've only involved 600 participants. So one of the risks with salami slicing is that it conflates the scale of the evidence. You think there is a stronger evidence base for something than there actually is. That's particularly important in clinical trials research, where you're arguing that an intervention is safe and effective and should be delivered to a patient group, when in fact the evidence that you're using to inform that decision is based on double, triple, quadruple counting of the evidence because the authors have salami sliced. So this is an important issue. It's an issue that my editorial colleagues in Nursing Reports are very good at spotting. And it is, I think, something that reviewers should be very mindful of looking at when they are reviewing manuscripts. Okay, allocation manipulation. I don't know whether this is questionable or just bad. So I don't know if anybody's done this. If anybody's reviewed a randomized controlled trial, there aren't as many randomized controlled trials in nursing as a discipline as there are in medicine. But one of the things that you may notice is that if you look at the consort diagram, consort stands for Consolidated Standards for Reporting Randomized Controlled Trials. It's the kind of flow chart that is or should be reported in every manuscript reporting a randomized controlled trial. It's not uncommon that you see precisely equal groups in the, precisely equal sample sizes in both the experimental and the control group. So people have, for example, randomized 100 participants and they get 50 patients in the experimental group and 50 patients in the control group. And that's what you want, isn't it? And the answer is no, it's not actually. It's not what you would expect. So randomization is built on the principle that people have an equal chance to be in either the experimental or the control group. You flip a coin effectively, and that people could be either in the experimental or the control group. If you're doing a randomized controlled trial and you're randomizing 100 patients, the chances of you getting exactly 50 participants in each group is lower than you would think. If anybody doesn't believe me and they are a little bit bored with me prattling on, find a coin and flip it 100 times and see whether you get 50-50. So what researchers often do is allocation manipulation. So they will randomize people by the flip of a coin or using a random number generator, and they will allocate people to either the experimental group or the control group until they get to the 50 people in the experimental or 50 people in the control. And when they get to that point, The rest of the patients that are allocated to the other group to balance it up. And that becomes a huge problem because once you know which group participants are going to be allocated to, that introduces bias. You will, if you know that the patient is going to go into the control group, you might choose a patient who is sicker or you think is less likely to respond. There will be some conscious or unconscious bias that will impact the result of the paper. It's a fairly complex issue. I possibly have spent more time thinking about this than is good or healthy for me, but it is a really important issue. And if you are reviewing randomized controlled trials and you see that the group size is exactly the same, then you should ask questions about how participants were allocated to those two groups. And it's also interesting when you see a study and you see that 100 patients were randomized, there were 50 in each group, and 50 were followed up. Again, people may want the perfect flow of participants through the study. They may believe that that makes their study look good. But if you have 50 in group A, 50 in group B, and exactly 50 in group A and 50 in group B were followed up, something's happened. I've done a lot of clinical trials. I have never followed up 100% of the participants that I included in that study. So allocation manipulation in clinical trials, in experimental studies generally is common. And it does seem to be particularly common in nursing as a discipline, perhaps where we are not as experienced at doing clinical trials as they might be in medicine and some other clinical disciplines. Right, I am aware that my time is running out. This is more general research advice than reviewer advice. There are lots of questionable research practices. If you are a reviewer, your task is to try and look at ways in which the design of the study, the reporting of the study, there may have been some manipulation. I'm going to go back to the replication crisis in psychology. The data on replication crisis in psychology suggests that researchers manipulated things to get a positive result. Why did they manipulate things to get a positive result? Because studies with a positive result, with a significant result, are more likely to get published in a better journal, and they're more likely to get cited more. And that takes me back to my original point about the citation delusion. Citation doesn't necessarily mean that you have done good research. Citation means that you have attracted attention for your research. Perhaps I have been in the business a bit too long, but what I am interested in doing as a researcher is doing good research, testing novel and important research questions, and not just coming up with significant results. I've done quite a lot of experiments. Some of those experiments have produced the result that I predicted. Some of those trials have not produced the result that I predicted. But what I cannot do and what I can't do is to start going back and start changing things just to get a good result, just so that I can get it in a good journal and just so that I can get my paper cited. If you're a reviewer, it is your job to look critically at the work that is in front of you, and be cynical about some of the motivations that researchers have. These are questionable research practices. I'm not saying that they are mispractice, malpractice, bad practice. I'm not quite saying that, but they're definitely not good practice. I hope colleagues may have some questions about questionable research practices. If you do, please put them in the chat. I am 2 minutes over my time allocation, which is my bad, but I will shut up and hand over to Paula Buenavu. I'm trying to use my best Italian accent, Paula, which is not particularly impressive. But welcome, Paula. You're a full professor of work and organizational psychology at LUNSA, which is in Italy. Italy is a beautiful part of the world, and part of the world that I have not had the pleasure of exploring particularly. But Paula, we welcome you and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you for giving the floor. What I prepared is really, based on my experience of being a reviewer. So I am going to share what was my work and my difficulties, the issues I had to deal with during my period of being a reviewer. I have prepared some slides, so I would like to share them with you. And here we are. Why reviewing matters? I know it's a very general question, but it's very important because, every one of us is really, under the responsibility of handling the quality of the result of research. So it's very important for us to be conscious about that. So the role we play is not only technical, that is to help the authors to improve the papers or to understand whether the quality of the papers deserve to be published or not. But also we have also dealing with an ethical issue. We are responsible for what is going to be shared in the academic community. I think also that it's a great opportunity for those who make reviews to improve their academic skills. I became a better writer because through reviewing, I was able to understand more my mistakes and strengths when I write. I was able to become more careful about the way I present the ideas of my paper. And I understand in a better way how to shape, how to write a better paper. So it's something that is also very useful for any author to work with reviewing issues. So our role when we review a paper is to evaluate, of course, the contribution, but also to provide constructive feedback. This is very important because especially young authors, when they receive a very strong negative critical issues, sometimes they might find very not only just upset, but also they might think that they're not able to be a very good author. Feedback has to be very, very clear, very at the point of what is needed to say, but also very constructive. We have also a kind of responsibility over helping people to improve their paper, but also their way of delivering their message. It's also obvious that our role as a reviewer is to help editors to make a grounded decision. So our role is to be a mentor and not just somebody who check whether a paper is good or not. It's not enough. We have ethical principle to follow. that is, be very careful about the kind of bias we could have, because maybe we might not share the same position or the same approach of the authors, but doesn't mean that the paper per se is not a good one. So we have to be very objective, very somehow able to see from distance the content. We have also an issue of confidentiality. Sometimes, especially if the paper follows into your research area, which is interesting for you, you might feel interesting to share the paper with other colleagues or with your colleagues, but this is not what we are asked. This is not what we are expected to do. Paper are meant to be reserved only to reviewers, and we do not have to show the paper to other people. Integrity. We should avoid the conflicts of interest. Sometimes it happens that you happen to be asked to review a paper that is written by a colleague you are working on, maybe on the same topic. In this case, it's better to step out and declare this and not take this review. Transparency. It's very important to explain why you are making the comments you are offering to the authors. It's very important because it helps the authors to improve in a very constructive way, but also improves the way our authors rethink about the way they present their paper. It's not enough just to say this is a bad paper. We must be very clear and ground on specific issues why we have this idea. So before accepting review, we must be able that we know the topic. It happens to me that sometimes I'm asked to deal with topics that are very close to my topics, but they're not really my topic. So I prefer to decline the offer, because if I don't feel that I am really good at dealing with this topic, I prefer to say, no, thank you. Next time I'll be ready to do something different. Check for conflicts of interest and ensure time availability. There is a time which is allocated for presenting the final review, and sometimes we are asked to deal with maybe 1 week or 2 weeks in a period where we are already very busy. So it's very important that we are sure that we are able to be in line with the deadline that are asked. And again, as I mentioned before, never share the manuscript. If you want to do this, if you are thinking of doing this, we must always ask approval from the editor. If I'm not an expert, I can suggest a colleague. Another big problem with reviewing is some reviewers suggest to add as a quotation one or even more of his or her works. This is not fair. Unless you have already published something that is really, really, really relevant, this is a very bad practice. Also, it might be happening that authors are quoting themselves very often. It happens to me, for instance, just to give an example, that the author was quoting his own works in his paper something like 46 times. This is really too much. And that was one major point for asking to review, to change the paper. If I suspect plagiarism, this is very important to report to the editor. Sometimes plagiarism is linked to what has been said before, because authors tend to reply almost even the same study several times. This is very important because, of course, there is nothing new that can be added to the knowledge already developed on some issue. There is also an option for many journals to sign the review. Yes, it is possible, but only if the journal allows to do this. Some journals do not allow to do this. So in this case, we shouldn't sign our review. What has to be realized? What is important to look for? It's very important to see whether there is a real justification of the hypothesis. This is normally done in the introductory section. Hypothesis is very important because they must be grounded on the previous literature, and they explain the reason, the idea that moved the study. It happens that hypotheses are just put there. This happens very, very often. This is maybe because, authors, after having read and reread and reread, maybe lose connection, because, if you read many, many, many times your paper, in the end, you know by heart what is written down. So in this case, it's very difficult for them to understand the limit of their writing. But a hypothesis must be strictly linked to the previously literature review. Sometimes logical structure or the reasoning is really lacking. From general to specific, we must go. And each section of paragraph should be linked to the previous and the next one. This seems to be very obvious, but sometimes is not obvious at all. And this makes the paper difficult to understand or to follow. We can guess maybe the reasoning, but it's not made really explicit. The wording, the way how the communication is dealt is very important, because if you want to communicate our results, it's very important that we make people in the position of understanding what we are going to say. Accuracy in formatting is something that is very annoying because typos, incorrect citation, for example, acronyms, so these kind of things are very upsetting, because somehow it shows that there was no care in delivering the paper. It happens, not very often, but it happens. And normally it generates a more critical approach to the paper. But it's very important to make people aware that authors, aware that you detected this kind of problem. Literature has to be up to date and reasoned. It's not, sometimes it's like the literature as it is presented is more something like a shopping list. That is, well, in the light of this theory, and this theory, we decided to verify this hypothesis. This is not enough. This is not enough because it does not present how these theories are linked to each other to deliver the hypothesis. We must able to understand why this literature was chosen to ground this study. It's very important also to ask and to make clear in the paper why the study is important, for whom it can be important or useful. scholars, practitioners, end users, or maybe for all of them. But it's very important because the content, the findings, the reasoning will be clearly linked to the people you are delivering your message. It's very important also to explain what and how the study is proposing something new to the existing literature. This is something that very often lacks in the paper. But this is precious to understand why this paper is important to be published. Why we should be reading this paper? What is adding that is relevant? Another point that I very often find missing or not properly addressed is a definition and explanation of all the constructs and theories used in the study. Sometimes there are very famous, very well-known theories, but some explanation has to be offered. Why this? Because sometimes you have some constructs or some theories that are not very well known, especially in this case. It's very important, and it's very important to have the definition so that we know which are the let's say the pieces on which the paper is built up. Very often it happens that in qualitative studies, scales are used. It's very important to know whether they've been validated either internationally or also locally. For instance, the scales of mass like burnout inventory has been validated not only at international level, but even in many countries. So it's very important that it has been validated. Another problem about the scales is that scales have different dimensions. I might choose only 1 or 2 dimensions out of 3, for instance, but I cannot change the scales, the items. So I cannot use a reduced number of those that have already been validated in a subscale. Because in this case, I am changing the scale. Because the scale works because they are all the items together. So it's very important to know this. Sometimes scales are changed in order to make them more, let's say, closer to the participants. For instance, if you use a burnout scale for teachers, you might use them for educators, but maybe you might need to change some word inside the item, and that's fine. But if you are in need of changing the wording, the paper must to declare this and why this change have been made and in which way items have been changed, because otherwise the scale that has been validated is no longer what has been used. This happens very often. It happens, for instance, when there has been a national survey on some issue. So they use part of the scales or part of an instrument, and they say that I've used the instrument, but in reality is not like that. How to carry out in a very practical way the review? It's very important to read the whole paper very accurately from the very beginning to the end, at least once before starting to think how to deal with this. The second time, take notes while you're reading. Taking notes about what you think could be the critical points, but also the strengths of the paper. And after reading the second time, again, your notes, review the notes, because sometimes, it happens, for instance, that there are explanations that should be put at the beginning, but in reality they are put later. So I put a note that there is something missing, but then I understand that that point was not really missing, but just put maybe later or in the wrong place. How to make comments? It's important to highlight the strengths and also identify whether there are major issues or minor correction and final recommendation. Again, it's very important that we offer a positive approach to the review. So that is help authors to improve how to work. It's very important. The first time I submitted my paper, I received such a strong negative review that I was so ashamed of myself that I started thinking that I would never be able to submit any real good paper, because they were very strong in their criticism. Criticism is needed, absolutely, and it has to be very precise. It has to be very factual, absolutely, but yeah, it has to be very respectful. It has to be very factual. That is, we should highlight everything that is not working well, and this is helpful. But also, let's say, comments like even a new student of PhD might be able to have understood something like that. It happened to me to receive this kind of criticism, and it's very difficult to get it, especially again for young. I'm no longer a young writer, of course, but for young people, this could be very disruptive. So the best thing we can do is to be very specific, very clear, very factual on the paper and not on the authors. It happens also another thing that my approach is work and organizational psychology. That is an applied science. It happened to me to have submitted my papers to journals that were not specific of psychology, work and organizational psychology. And we must take into consideration that maybe different discipline might have this different approach. Education has a different approach. Economics has a different approach. We should take this into consideration. The main issue is that tone matters as much as content. Constructive communication and is always required. It is very, very important. Assessing the contribution. I always ask myself, why should I suggest my colleagues to read this paper? What this paper add to the field? What is the gap in the literature, in the study that is going to address? Sometimes papers are interesting because they are studies that are carried out in different cultural areas. For instance, in the Western countries, we have a very individualistic culture. In the Eastern country, there is a more collectivism culture. So it might be interesting to replicate studies in different settings. But it's very important to know why they are doing this. Data is a big point. I realize that data sometimes are not good enough to support a publication. If the paper is badly written, but the data are good, we can ask to rewrite the part. But if the data are not good ones, we cannot accept in any way the paper. Conclusions have to be well supported, starting from the hypothesis. Hypothesis must be very much linked to the conclusions. There are other comments that can be made starting from the findings, but all the hypotheses have to be very much connected with the conclusions. Another point that I very often find to deal with is that methodology sometimes is just, presented in a very fast way with a few words, but it's not clear how, for instance, interviews were performed, who did the interviews, how the questionnaire was administered. So it's very important that methods are clearly described, because how data were collected is an important part of the quality of the data. Addresses why we should accept, why we should reject. Address if the paper really add something new, or maybe offer a new perspective or a way that theories can be applied in different settings. This is really important. Or sometimes the data, the study, shows that this theory can be explored to new context. This happens, for instance, in work and organizational psychology, because, for instance, the big part of these studies are carried out in profit environment. But for instance, looking at non-profit organizations, which are very important now, they're increasing their presence in the Western world, might be an interesting extension of the theory. If redundant or if the paper has no intellectual value, there is no way to save it. Redundant means, for instance, that it's been almost already published elsewhere, or the same findings have already been assessed or published everywhere. For instance, redundant is when you now find a paper assessing the stress during the COVID. Now is so many papers being published on during the COVID, during the pandemic, that we don't need to know much more. Besides, that was a very specific, very particular period. So what is now known about the COVID period is no longer useful unless there is something that is really justifying this.
About time, Paula?
Yes. Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
So you're about out of time, Paula. Just apologies for interrupting.
Okay. Can I just show this this slide? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Some flaws cannot be fixed. Poor quality data. Incomplete, inconsistent, biased. For instance, once it happened to me to assess a paper where they ask a person during the COVID, were you stressed before or after the COVID? And they compared the results, taking this information at the same time with the same person. Of course, we couldn't compare first and after, asking the same moment, for instance. Validated scales altered without revalidation. This is what I mentioned. No clarity on tools, how they were administrated, on how they were developed. And also no ethical proof. This is something that is absolutely necessary. In psychology, we have a way to say garbage in, garbage out. If you have bad data, which are garbage, the result will be of course, garbage. But we can fix the situation when there is a weak literature review. We can ask for more thorough literature review. And and there are statistical issues that can be fixable. Maybe we can ask for more analysis or poor writing. Sorry, I finished. I am sorry for taking...
Absolutely fine, Paula, and I apologize for interrupting
No, thank you for reminding me. Thank you.
My bad. Thank you for your presentation. If colleagues have got questions that they would like to ask Paula, please put them into the Q&A section. I have been throwing some random thoughts into the chat because I can't put things into the Q&A. I don't know why. It's fine. Thanks, Paula. We'll come back to you. Hopefully colleagues have got some questions. Can I hand over to Niall? Niall lives and works in Brisbane at the Queensland University of Technology, because I can read out loud from what is on his slide. Niall is also the section editor-in-chief for artificial intelligence and digital innovation in nursing care. Artificial intelligence is endlessly fascinating. I am intrigued to know what Niall is going to talk about. Niall, can I hand over to you? The floor is yours.
So I did notice that you had put some comments in the chat. One with regard to is the use of AI ethical? And I think that's most of what I'm going to be talking about. But you have to know what AI is as well. It's not just all generative AI, ChatGPT, Copilot, those sorts of things. AI is used for it can be used as a complicated statistical way of being able to answer questions. Machine language is a form of AI. I'm particularly interested in natural language processing, which is another form of AI, and where we can get make sense of clinical notes in an electronic medical record. So my presentation is titled Reviewer's Compass, and aims to provide a structured approach to navigating these challenges with the temptation of using generative AI platforms and the ethical principles. I have to say that a lot of the work that Paula is saying was very timely and linked quite closely to what I'm talking about as well. The main point that I get from AI, and I'll move on to the next slide, is that it's not moving. Is it moving? Is that it's useful for me to write nice emails, because I get in a grumpy mood and I go, that's not good, that's not right, that's not good. And I put it all out and I go, I get in trouble if I do this. So I'll put it onto Copilot. Can you make this nice and polite? And it comes back and it's absolutely beautiful. And I'll go back to that later on. I do upset so fewer people by doing that. So the ethics is the foundation for peer review. For example, if you recognize an author's work, you have to disclose it to the editor. Basically, going back to the editor and making sure that your work is transparent. Again, something that was said earlier. AI tools can assist reviewers by checking grammar, summarizing content, identifying plagiarism. But the thing is, with MDPI journals, you cannot upload a PDF of a paper that you're reviewing onto the platform. Now, you may go onto a platform and say, what happens to the paper? And it'll say it's deleted immediately. It's always on the RAM. As soon as it'll be cleared, nobody else can get it. But essentially what you're doing is publishing the paper before it's being reviewed. So don't be tempted to do that. Follow everything that Paula was saying. Go through all of your steps. Do your normal review. Take your notes. But if you think your notes are going to insult people, that's when I would use ChatGPT to tidy it up. Make it nice, make it positive. Don't take everything that it says completely at face value, because I also work in mental health, and what generative AI platforms are famous for is hallucinating. And I've tried this as well. You can get onto a topic, ask the platform to look for you. It'll throw up a beautiful array of well-formatted APA style references, and they're bogus. You can't, the journal exists, but the paper doesn't, or the author doesn't. And you can say, no, don't look at this, try this. And you can try all these different ways. It just won't do it. And it can't do it. And if you try to publish something else for, say, an encyclopedia, it's promotional tone all the way through. It doesn't take anything as factual. So you have to be very specific. Please say this in a factual, non-promotional way, and it's too hard. And use it only for your own grammar check, I would think. So you have everything that you have and pop it on that way. So over-reliance on AI does raise ethical concerns, and it is critical to remember that reviewers are fully responsible for their reports. And confidentiality is paramount. And as I said, uploading manuscripts is a very bad idea. It's strictly prohibited. And even using AI for anything, you should disclose it as well. If you've used AI for anything, say, if people use the abstract of a paper is usually free anywhere. It's used for promotion. It's used for advertising, getting it out there, and it doesn't take away from the copyright or the ownership of the journal. But if you pop it onto a generative platform beforehand, you've essentially given it the seed to infer everything about that study, and whether it's being stored or not, nobody knows. So again, just use it for your example, keep it clear, and follow the steps that Paula mentioned before. So you want to say something about the paper, you want to say something that's needs to a major point, then a minor point, and then tidy it up. I use the Copilot I use for making my language a lot better. Not saying that people from Northern Ireland don't have nice language, but there you go. Now, it violates confidentiality, over-reliance, and misinterpretations. Yep, that it can look at a whole paper. I've put a paper on before when I was trying to look at a literature review. It went through, give me a critique, but basically it was all based on the abstract. Didn't go into the paper at all. Made up all these problems that weren't there and didn't exist. So even then it wasn't that good. And it can go one way and say it's all really positive and say, yes, it's meeting everything. And then you say, well, what about this? And it goes, oh, you're absolutely right. It shouldn't do that. It doesn't do this. So it's very fickle. If you do not disclose that you've used AI to actually review a paper, so upload it, you've done this, you've uploaded it, you think, that's okay, this is safe, and you don't disclose that, then that raises concerns about your authorship. Changing your grammar isn't completing your review. That's just changing your grammar. Your review is your intellect, and there's very few people like you who can actually do this. So be confident with what your skills and the quality that you bring to these reviews is. I don't, it's difficult for me to identify plagiarism. I don't use AI tools to identify plagiarism. It is just following your normal steps that Paula was talking about and what Richard was talking about. And you have to keep your credibility as a reviewer to ensure your transparency. Now, the areas that we had looked at here, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, uploading is confidentiality, misinterpretations. I'm just going to go through each one of these in a little bit more detail. Try and be as quick as I can. The ethical inside, manuscripts are confidential, shouldn't be shared. So you don't share it with your colleague, you also don't share it with a third-party platform, including the tools. Use it for grammar, and there's an example, because there's nowhere actually on the area on the platform to say, have you used it for a review? And you say, well, no. But if you have used something, you used put that line in on the comments back to the editor. So you can say, well, I have used it, but for this purpose and for that purpose. I was unsure of the statistics behind it, so I went through and used it for that. Reviewers may accept AI-generated summaries. So the human judgment there, the ethical insight, is central to a fair peer review. So as I said, the ChatGPT is going on a whole, it's been trained by a whole bunch of different data, whether that's from Western nations or Eastern nations. It'll be different for one culture to the next, and the insights and the type of work will be different as well. So you have no idea where it's coming from. Not to say I don't like AI. I really like AI. I just wouldn't use it to do it for peer review. Don't use it for content analysis. So AI tools may carry biases from the training data, as I just mentioned. Transparency, the ethical issue, is essential in scholarly communication, as Richard was saying. And if you want to do this summary of a peer review, follow the steps that Paula was saying. Give a summary of the manuscript, give an overall assessment. What are your major comments? What are your minor comments? And then confidential comments to the editor, although sometimes the editors come back and say, okay, if we send these onto the author as well, that's fine. But only use AI for your own grammar. So I think that is an area where a big impact on how you communicate back to the authors in a polite, non-biased, clear, factual way is a great benefit. If you're like me and you get stuck on sentences and you wish you hadn't said that in the first place, you can tidy it up with the AI generative work, but you would never upload the entire document onto the platform. Ask it to do a literature review, ask it to do a critical review, ask it to do a statistical review. Any of those things are what you are capable of, what you are an expert at, and I'll leave it at that. There's a couple of papers where I got some of these ideas from as well.
Thanks, Niall. I'm hoping colleagues have got questions about the use of AI. It is ethically interesting. This is a question that we need to ask. I'm intrigued as to how often people. This is just a reflection. This is don't respond. Come to the Q&A. Kind of what proportion of authors are using AI one way or the other? I know in nursing reports we ask people to declare whether they've used AI. I'm fairly confident. Well, most authors say there's been no use of AI anywhere in this paper at all. But if I contrast that with students, I think everybody's very aware that students in universities are using AI to do everything. So if students are using it so prevalently, are authors really not using it that much? I'm intrigued. Perhaps that's something we can discuss a little more in the Q&A session. But Niall, thank you for your presentation. Our final speaker this afternoon, this morning, or this evening, I've got that the wrong way around, this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, depending on the time zone you are in, is Sojib Zaman, who is from the good old US of A, but formerly from downtown Melbourne, which is where I am at the moment. So Sojip is talking about transparency and rigor in peer review. So Sojip, over to you. You are bringing the presentations to a close in style, I trust, before we move to some questions and answers.
So, of course, it is a great honor for me to talk here in this podium on the transparency and rigor in peer review, keys to high quality reports. Basically, this is a midnight in my time zone in Virginia, United States at 3 a.m. night. So I may look a little bit sleepy and tired.
You're insane. Your commitment to the cause is impressive.
So thank you again. My name is Sojip Zaman, and I work as an assistant professor of health sciences at James Madison University. I teach courses like chronic disease, infectious disease, statistical methods, and research methods. So I'm very intrigued related to the research methodology and also the statistics. And I also have a professional experience of doing research in my clinical fields, and also I do some consultant related to work with Virginia Department of Health and CDC as well. So I have been working as an editorial board member with various responsibilities, from associate editor to academic editor for 5 public health and medical journals. I have edited more than 10 papers and reviewed more than 30 manuscripts in last year. So based on my experiences, I will share my 2 cents on the topics on peer reviews, rigor, and transparency. So I should start with this quotation. So peer review is the backbone of scientific credibility. But what happens when the spine is bent? Here is an interesting story, I should say scary story as well. Back in 2013, a Harvard journalist, John Bohannon, submitted a deliberately flawed paper to 304 open access journals. Shockingly and interestingly, half of them accepted it for the publication, most of the cases without going through proper evaluation process. So this STING project actually exposed the serious flaws and of the peer review process, and sparked global debate about the quality control in academic publishing. And he mentioned, quotation, any reviewer with more than a high school college knowledge of chemistry and the ability to understand the basic data plot should have spotted the paper's shortcomings immediately. Its experiments are so hopelessly flawed that the results are meaningless, which means a lot of things actually have to take care when we are going to review the papers in terms of on the perspective of the editors and also the reviewers. So why peer reviews matters? Because transparency in peer review doesn't weaken the process. I should say it strengthens the science. It filters out flaws, biased, unethical research, and validates methods, data, and conclusions. All of our distinguished key speakers talked about that on. It acts as a quality control mechanism, build trust in published work, provides constructive feedback to authors, encourage clarity, rigor, and reproducibility, which is really important for the research. We must have to generate the knowledge and which should be reproducible. And of course, it's going to be fosters collaboration and accountability and helps maintain a standard across the disciplines. This is well known. So we do have a single blind review where reviewers knows the review author, but the author doesn't know the reviewers. It has some pros and cons. There are anonymity, of course, but it is also prone to some reviewer bias as well. We do have a double blind review, which is really gold standard. Neither the author nor the reviewer know each other's identity. Really very good in terms of reducing bias related to gender, affiliation, and academic position, of course. This is a new one, which is called open review. So both the author and the reviewer's identities are known, and sometimes the review report are also published. This is really a good one. We'll talk about it as well. It really promotes transparency and accountability and reviewers. But the cons is that it is also, there are the potential for some bias as well. So what are the challenges in terms of the peer review? Of course, bias is an issue because reviewers can be influenced by author identity, institution, gender, and nationality. There is something called confirmational bias, which means I'm going to favor the results that align with my personal beliefs and some of the ground theories that I am going to apply. Of course, lack of accountability is an issue because anonymous reviews can lead to careless, overly harsh, and unconstructive feedback. And finally, inconsistency around the review quality. Standards are not same. For example, some papers, when we are going to submit in the journal, some reviewers will provide minor reviews, some is going to provide major revisions, some is going to reject the paper. So this is something which are the challenges in terms of the peer review. So my area, how we are going to define the transparency in peer review. The first one is the clear reviewer guideline, because it's going to give a clear understanding of the criteria that reviewers need to evaluate. Of course, some journals, as I mentioned earlier, adopt the open review model, which is really good because reviewers' identities are disclosed and it really fosters accountability. Providing specific, detailed, and actionable feedback, ensuring that the authors understand the rationale behind the decisions and the areas that needs the improvement in terms of the manuscript. And it is really important that the reviewers and the authors are going to have the review report and they know why it has been done and what is the basic background over here. And if there are some potential conflict of interest in terms of personal, financial, or professional, that should be disclosed before the review process begins. In terms of the academic rigor in peer review, I should say the first one is going to be the comprehensive evaluation, because reviewers should be able to assess all aspects of the submitted work, including research design, methodology, data collection, analysis, interpretation, and conclusions. As Paula mentioned, that's really the basic backbone of a research. Critical analysis is very important. Evidence-based judgment should be based on the scientific evidence that have been presented in the paper, not based on the personal opinion or assumptions. Consistency is, of course, important. Transparency in decision-making, it requires that the reviewers clearly justify their feedback and decisions, why it has been taken, and it gives them a clear pathway to improve the work of others. Timeliness is also an important, because it should be done within a responsible time frame. So what is the interplay between the transparency and rigor? So when the review process is transparent, reviewers are more accountable for their assessments, and it leads to more detailed, evidence-based, and constructive feedback. And of course, rigor supports transparency, and together they build trust to the editors, trust to the authors, and to the reviewers, and to the general readers as well. So there are some common pitfalls in peer review that all the time we have follow these things. The first one is bias and conflict of interest, very important. Inadequate knowledge of the subject. If the reviewers who is going to review that things, they have lack of knowledge on that field, it's going to be, they are going to provide some inaccurate feedback maybe. Some of the cases giving only critical feedback without offering constructive suggestions. Overlooking flaws in research design, methodology, and data analysis, providing general and superficial comments which doesn't make sense, which we consider as a vague comments. And some of the cases, reviewers are really hesitant to reject the paper because even though the paper doesn't meet the journal size standards. So what are the tools actually that we can adopt in terms of enhance the transparency? As I mentioned earlier, open peer review system is something which I really like because it allows reviewers' identities and their comments to be disclosed to the authors and in some cases to the public. Conflict of interest disclosure is very important. Review transparency policy, post-publication peer review policy, peer review training programs, very important so that all the reviewers are on the same page. And integrated data sharing is very important because it allows authors to share data sets and supplementary materials, and it enables reviewers and editors to assess the validity and reliability of the research. Some tools are very important. For example, the statistical software analysis tools like SPSS Stata to ensure that the validity of the statistical analysis and the interpretation of the results, data verification and replication platforms, standardized reporting guidelines like Consort, Prisma, and Store. That is something really important and helpful. Double-blind review, as I mentioned earlier, automated plagiarism detection tools, Turnitin or Authenticate is very helpful, and sometimes checklist for the ethical compliance is going to be good in terms of adhering the research in terms of clinical guidelines and other steps. I'll just briefly talk about what are the roles of editors, reviewers, and authors, because it's an interplay between these three players. The first one is going to be the role of the editors. When he or she is going to take this hat, they should act like a fair and objective analysis of the paper, selection of a qualified reviewers suitable for that particular manuscript, facilitating transparency process, of course, managing the review process very nicely, knowing what is going to happen in next steps. His or she is going to provide some constructive feedback, and also if there are some disputes in between reviewers and authors, he or she is going to take care of that as well. And finally, editor is responsible to maintain academic integrity, publication integrity, and also in terms of the prestige of the journal as well. On the other hand, the reviewers, they are going to evaluate manuscript quality of the manuscript in terms of, as I mentioned, study design, statistical analysis, and rationale, of course. They are going to provide constructive feedback. They will follow whether the manuscript that has been submitted is going to follow the Consort or Prisma, this guideline. And of course, it is essential to maintain the confidentiality here. And finally, a reviewer should understand this piece of work is going to contribute for the scientific advancement in future. What are the roles of the authors? Very simple. They should conduct high quality research, adhere to the ethical guidelines, ensuring the data integrity, responding to the reviewer's feedback nicely when it is required, and submitting to the appropriate journal. Scope of journal is very important. So what are some of the future directions of the peer reviews? Nowadays, it is really hard to get reviewers because they are busy and doing their work. It's really voluntary work without monetary compensation. So valuing peer reviews as a scholarly work, promoting diversity in reviewers pools, recognition and reward system, encouraging collaboration and competitions, reduction of bias in the review process. And finally, I should say, leveraging the artificial intelligence and machine learning to assist the review process is important, as Neil said. So some of the metrics are very helpful in terms of recognizing to encourage reviewers to do the review, particularly certificate badges or acknowledgements. We do have a wonderful platform like ORCID or Web of Science platform, which shows the professional I should say, profile based on the review activity. And some journals are really helpful, like MDPI. They show the contribution of the peer reviewers in published article. You will have a look, okay, these are the reviewers, and he or she was the editor of that particular article. And if it is possible to provide some tangible rewards and incentives like discounts for a journal subscription, free access to article, or even monetary compensation to editors, that should be wonderful in terms of providing high quality and timely peer review. So that's my last slide. So a high quality report begins with a high quality review. If we cannot ensure that we cannot ensure a proper scientific contribution. In conclusion, while I should say peer review faces challenges, it remains fundamental to the advancement of the science. By continuing improving and adapting this peer review system, we can ensure that it continues to support the production of high quality, credible research for our future generation. Thank you very much.
Zaman, thank you for your presentation. Can I thank all of the colleagues that have presented, Paula, Niall, and Zaman. Thank you for interesting, informative, and stimulating presentations. If colleagues have got questions, now is the time to pop those into the chat. Oh, sorry, into the Q&A section. Karina's going to tell me off for using the wrong function, because I have been using the wrong function to stick my notes. I've been using chat and not Q&A. My bad. If there are any questions, yep, stick them in now. If not, I will ask a couple of questions of colleagues. So to Paula, one of my issues with salami.
Before you start discussing, I just want to mention, if anyone wrote their questions in the chat, please make sure that you select it to everyone, because you have the option to also select a few number of participants, and we may not be able to see your questions. If that's the case, we cannot ask the speakers to answer. And if you have any questions in the meantime, please either the chat, or the QA box, but for the chat, just be sure to mention to everyone. So that was it. So please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask Paula, but Niall and Zaman, please feel free to chip in, which is about when people kind of cut a paper and report it across cut a study and report it across multiple papers, so salami reporting. There's a tendency for them to self-plagiarize, and I don't know, Paula, this kind of relates to your presentation, but what your thoughts are on plagiarism. Bad, but what about self-plagiarism? I wrote it. Can't I just copy my own work and reuse it? Can't I self-plagiarize? Is that bad?
Well, the question is, is what I'm going to present is something new that have been already published in the literature? This is the main question, because if it really, the paper adds something, that's fine. Because sometimes, when you collect data, you collect different data. So if there is a very short pieces that can be published, this is not really interesting. But if it is something that may offer a wider idea, this is good. Sometimes, you can use your data for different papers, but you cannot replicate the same hypotheses, the same questions that have been addressed. Because it's very common that people, authors who do that, tend to play using the time. That is, they play on different journals, so they deliver almost the same paper in the same time in two different journals. And it happens to me that since I'm reviewing for different journals, to review the same paper, almost the same paper, not completely the same, but almost the same. So this is not ethical. And I think we should, even if the paper are good ones, we should report this.
Yeah,
Because
this
we
is
don't
kind of
want
my issue about citations. Aman, you made the point that reviewers are busy. I think reviewers have always been busy. Finding reviewers is really difficult because the number of papers that get published has increased. I don't know. I'm kind of the view that we've got more than enough paper. Do we need more? Should our focus be on more quality papers rather than just volume, which is I'm arguing for the sake of arguing when Niall, I suspect, has got more informative points to make.
Not really. I've just got another question. If you're going to replicate your work and replicate it in another language, where does that sit? Like a German colleague came to me, I wrote a paper, we could translate this into German and publish it in a German. And the English speaking nations will only accept quite often just English is one of the limiters on their systematic review. But you've just copied and pasted in a different language.
I have a view, but I'm English speaking, and I think, which means that I should have no comment. Paula, you're Italian, so you're
Yes, I am.
which is
You
not
can hear
wrong.
from my accent.
And intrigued on your thoughts around language issues and the language that you're kind of unfairly forced to publish in, because English people and Northern Irish people and American people are not kind of have a disinterest in anything published that is not published in English, which is terrible.
Yeah, what is not in English is not considered as something that is worthwhile to be considered when you go for instance, a public exam to become a full professor. Nobody would care about anything that is but in English. So, that's why.
Yes, it's fascinating. Niall, can I kind of ask you a question about how it's the question that I posed at the end of your presentation, which is how prevalent is the use of AI in manuscripts that are being sent out for peer review, and is it more prevalent than is declared?
My guess is yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say definitely yes, because I have a number of PhD students that come up from Asian countries and Middle Eastern countries, those sorts of places. They're here doing their study, and they openly declare, I'm using ChatGPT to write my paper because it helps with their English and how they present. So where do you draw the line? You draw the line at whether you're going to use if you're doing a literature review, use the ChatGPT to do the entire review for you. Because that's simple. You just put it through an AI generator detector and it picks it up. I know school students are on top of the latest developments where they can put it in and it comes out in a easily identifiable AI language, the way its sentences are constructed. But they just put it through another piece of software and it changes around and it comes out spoken and then pretended into something else. So they mix it up themselves and it can confuse the standard AI detectors. But at the end of the day, what Paula said is correct. It has to be something that they're actually saying, something that's of value, whether they've used a piece of software to help their English and grammar. I'm not really worried about it, but if you're plagiarizing across the board, I mean, when you're actually going to cite some literature and you're doing a review and you're talking about an author and their work, you are taking their work and you're rejumbling their words and putting it back as a summary. So that's what a lot of the people are using the generative work for, not so much Grammarly, I would think. I find AI is really good if you've only got a few ingredients in your cupboard at home. You say this, I want to make this cake, but I haven't got enough. I want to make a small cake. It'll do the calculations, and there you go. You can make your cake. or it'll do your own groceries for you and tell you, I've only got these ingredients in the cupboard. What's my grocery bill for the week? And it'll do those calculations. So it has its uses, but doesn't have its use for this type of work, because it's if you're reviewing a paper, you've spent a lot of years trying to figure out what research is in the first place. Then you've got to figure out what all of these different standards are for reporting as well, and get your head around them. And then you got to try and put that in with the paper when you're working on it. So if your English isn't right or wrong, doesn't really matter to me. It's whether you've got the elements in your paper and whether it comes across and delivers a succinct piece of useful research.
May I add something else? For instance, when I write a paper, I'm Italian, I write in English, and then maybe I can get it revised for my English. But it happens to me to be a reviewer of a paper that clearly, originally, was not written in English. So each language has its own reasoning. So, for instance, Italian is more circular in its presenting, in its delivering the message. English is most right. Mm. So sometimes the communication is really bad, but not because the paper is necessarily bad, but it needs to be rewritten because the idea, the way to present the content is not what could be easily understood in the academic community. That's another use of maybe AI.
Scientific language.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Corinne, you've got a...
I just want to mention an issue that we have with AI-generated reports or even manuscripts in line with what you mentioned. So it is good for, yeah, indeed, getting recipes and everything. But when talking scientific content, be it a review report or a manuscript, we have noticed, I deal with ethical cases also, and I have noticed there's an increase in fake references, including fake names, fake article titles. And it makes it so credible because it looks nice, Chicago style, whatever. But when you click on that reference, there's nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be found. So this is another caveat, to say so, to using the AI in reporting and in manuscripts. And I strongly advise everyone who's using it just to double check the references or the titles or even the facts and the relationships that are reported in those created sequences, so they won't be penalized after publication or even banned as reviewers.
I agree, Corinne. Now, the other thing you can do with the is get an actual reference, pop it into ChatGPT and ask it for the DOI. That doesn't come back right either.
Yeah.
So you put the actual reference in.
But I think, sorry, the period. So there's a bit of a sense that what AI is doing is making a strained peer review process more strained. It's a nice idea that I check the references to make sure that they're real.
It's hallucinating.
I did have another question for Paula, which is kind of how long should it take to do a peer review? I mean, and how long is it reasonable to be expected to spend doing a peer review?
I'd say it depends. Yeah, sorry. I'd say it depends on the quality of the paper, honestly. For good papers, it takes maybe a few hours. For bad papers, especially those who are not bad enough to be rejected, it takes much longer because you must explain and give suggestions on how to improve it. There is also maybe some discretionality about the reviewer because you can be inclusive or not. I tend to be inclusive. From my opinion, if the data are good enough, everything can be fixed. But sometimes there are a lot of things that must be fixed. So it takes really hours to write down in a very factual way how to improve it.
Zaman.
Yeah, I totally agree with Paula. So I think 2 to 3 hours mostly, based on the expertise that I have. If I only accept that manuscript, that I have the expertise. If I don't have any expertise, I don't usually work on that papers, because if I'm not know about, I mean, I am not aware of that areas, it's not actually worthy for my time. So mostly I should say 3 to 4 hours for me to make the decisions about that on. Yes.
It's a lot. It is a lot of time. And is there a line? Question to everybody: is there a line between reviewing a paper and editing a paper, kind of half doing the author's job for them?
Mm. Well, I think
I'm
that
hoping
can
that's a kind of thoughtful silence rather than.
I think that can come back to the elements that you would expect to see in a paper, particularly somethings like a structured systematic review. You're not saying this, you're not saying that, you're not doing this. You're looking at the discussion. The discussion's mostly results. Please discuss it critically on these issues. So you've got boundaries of your own work. I don't believe in going in and saying, well, it'd be really good if you wrote about this, and then that'll make a really good paper here. But it's no, you probably would use something like that if you're trying to say, well, the journal target audience appreciates this type of content. So nursing, so where's the nursing interventions, what's the nursing applications, these sorts of things, but not redoing the whole thing for them.
No, I think there is. I think there is a line, and I do think we sometimes drift towards it. Given the amount of time, I think, Zaman, you hinted at this in terms of the future of peer review, but you didn't say it. Should peer reviewers be paid? I mean, it's nice getting a badge, quite like a badge. But if it's 4 or 5 hours to review a paper, should colleagues, because my employer does not pay me to review papers, I don't think. I don't know, I might look at that. But where does that time, I mean, people do it in their own time, it's kind of, shouldn't they be paid? It doesn't seem particularly fair. I'm noting Karina's giving me a interesting look.
I'm not.
I've had the same question from ethical reviewers,
Oh
part
God,
of an
yeah,
ethics committee, and they don't get paid either. And at the large HREC conferences, that topic always comes up. So, university, the ones here, when I was at QUT, if you did this, it was called service hours.
Yeah, if I tot it up, sorry, I apologize for colleagues not in Australia. If I tot it up all the things I do in my service time, I wouldn't be doing any other things. Zaman.
I totally agree. It's sort of a service hours, and as I mentioned, so I have that intention all the time. So when I write a paper, I need reviewers. Somebody's reviewing my paper, and I'm just giving. It's a given and taken relationship. So I am just doing the opposite. I'm just helping others to grow, and so it's a give and taken relationship. On that basis, I believe it's a well balanced phenomenon. So monetary issue shouldn't be a concern right now, but of course recognition is something which we need.
And also giving money might push people to get review they are not really good at, just because of the money. We must say this. So I prefer not to be paid. I think it's better. Maybe could be a good idea not to take too many reviews for when you are very busy, but being paid for this, I think it's would be making in some way commercial option, and I don't think it would help the ethics of our review work.
I would ask the question whether academic publishing, is that not a commercial endeavor? There is a no, can I slightly cut you off? There's a question in the Q&A, which is to everybody. Is it necessary to comment on every part of the article? Would it be acceptable to the editorial team if reviewers only focused on certain parts, such as methodology or the discussion? I don't know who would like to take that question.
In my point of view, methodology is a big issue. And I wouldn't be able to review every types of methodology that have been used to analyze the data. But I think in this case, I might be able to offer other insights on the paper. But it is important to declare this when I do my review. That is, I'm able to review this part, but not that part, so that other reviewers can integrate what I do. Because maybe it could be useful to have some review of the rest of the paper, but it's important to be honest and not to talk about what we do not know enough.
Because
This
you
is
do
my
that for
point of view.
statistical reviews, don't you? You get a statistician to look at the stats.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a separate question. I'm aware that our kind of time is pretty much done. I was just going to work my way around the room and ask for kind of closing comments, but to do it I was going to do it in reverse order of who spoke. So, oh, sorry, Karina.
Before we end the session, I just want to say something in relation to the payment of the reviewers, the incentive part.
Yes.
I know
I didn't mean to say what you're about to say.
I know that payment for reviews is typically common with traditional model journals. However, in open access, I just looked on the internet and to see if there are any open access journals that pay for reviews. I cannot find any concrete information, and I'm just gonna leave this aside, but I want to talk about what MDPI doing for the reviewers. So we do offer vouchers that can be used in whatever journal the researchers choose to within MDPI, and also for certain journals, in collaboration with the editor-in-chief, we usually establish the Outstanding Reviewer Award, which is quite good compensation for reviewers that contribute really really well to the journal, and it's given out once a year. And of course there are other means of compensating the reviewers, and for academic editors we actually have travel grants and ways to support them financially, even though we don't make a monthly payment or a wire transfer for their services.
Yeah, no, sorry, Karina, I did mean to mention that MDPI do
Sorry.
give kind of voucher credit for doing reviews, which is, I think, it is a good token and does acknowledge the contribution that reviewers make. I would not like to count the number of reviews I've done in my career. I have never been paid a dime for doing those reviews. It's an interesting and important debating point, perhaps. Can I just work my way around the room, ask for some closing comments from Zaman first? Any kind of closing thoughts, Zaman?
Oh, so sorry. So I think it's a wonderful perspective to know about the review process. Particularly, it is really interesting to know about the AI and also the transparency and guidelines presented by Paula. I really liked the way they presented. And yeah, some of the things are really eye-opening related to the use of AI. We talked about these payment systems and other stuffs. That's really encouraging. And yeah, I believe this sort of communication we should have, because all the journals offer the communication and collaboration between authors, editors, reviewers, and that's how actually we work together.
Cool.
Thank you.
And thank you, Zaman, for your presentation. Appreciated. Niall, a couple of punchy comments.
I think that AI is in its infancy at the moment, a bit like when Google and medical records came out. Doctors were afraid of everything going to be presented to them of journals from Google. So it has to develop. And I think that we will be able to become more comfortable with it in the future. But at the moment, it's a bit sticky.
It's a bit sticky, Niall. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, if what's brown and sticky, a stick.
Ah, dear me. Paula, final comment from you.
Don't get discouraged. It's the first times you review a paper, it takes you hours and hours. This is something that you learn doing. So next times will be better.
Yes, Paula, that's a good point to close on. Nobody ever teaches you how to do peer review. I remember being sent a paper and literally sent a paper. It arrived in the post with a cover letter hand typed on a typewriter. That's not true. Hand typed on a typewriter from the editor saying, "Could you please review this?" And literally thinking, how? What do I do? It is being a peer reviewer is it's a real skill. I worry that it is a skill that is undervalued, but colleagues that get involved in peer review are making a important, critical part to the scientific process, and part of the endeavor of producing high quality, important knowledge, ultimately, that improves the care that we give to patients. I always worry that people forget why we do research. We don't do research for citations. We do research to improve clinical care. Can I thank Karina and MDPI colleagues for organizing the webinar in a slick, professional, and another word that can't spring into my head, meticulous, that's a good word, meticulous way. It is much appreciated. Thanks to colleagues for coming along and listening and engaging. And I wish you all a good morning, good evening, or as they used to say in a comedy program a long time ago, good night. I'll see you all soon.
And it's good night from me.
Good night from me.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, especially Dr. Zaman. You
Good
should
night.
really go to sleep right now. And thank you all for being here. Most of the work has been done by my colleagues in the backstage. I was just the host, but it's been wonderful to meet you all, and I do hope we do have the opportunity to collaborate in the future. It's been a blast, and I wish you a good start to this week.